Let's see what we got here. Double Sphere of Safety. Interesting. There's only 2 copies in the deck, but I'm going to keep the hand. We have the lands to potentially be able to cast these spheres. So the question is going to be, what's our opponent playing? Forest Experiment 1, okay. So, looks like some sort of aggressive deck. So the plan is, unfortunately we don't have a early enchantment to play, or any sort of early spell. So the plan is going to be to hope that this aggressive draw out of our opponent isn't going to be too fast, so that we can't do what we want to do. And the Path to Exile is a nice pickup. So we can path away one of our opponent's creatures. It appears that we're up against a mono green aggressive deck. So yeah, the third forest sort of confirms that suspicion. And here's an avatar of the Resolute. So I actually think we want to just get rid of this experiment one. And that's going to stop the avatar. Well, it looks like our opponent has other ideas. Vines of Vastwood is going to stop our path to exile. Wasn't expecting that one, but you know what? It's hard to know what a deck like this mono green aggro deck is going to be playing. So there's good and bad things about our opponent countering the path there. The bad thing is that we're taking a bunch of damage and our opponent still has the experiment one. But now at least we can get this Face Fetters out without our opponent Vines of Vastwooding in response to this card. So we get the Face Fetters out. The plan is going to be to then get both of these Sphere of Safeties out, sorry. Not Sphere of Resistance, Sphere of Safety. Get both of these out and stop our opponent from being able to go wide and kill us. So we're at 10 here. Been waiting on the Nykthos. This seems like the time to play it. So the Sphere of Safety right now is acting essentially as a ghostly prison. So our opponent's still going to be able to attack us, but once we get the second one out and then start adding more enchantments, we can. It's going to be a lot more difficult for our opponent to attack with more than one creature. So it looks like the play is going to be to attack us down to 5 here. And there's a Porphyr Nodes. I don't think we need or want to play that this turn. If we get the other sphere out, it does a bit more, and then we can always play the nodes next turn. So yeah, I like the Sphere of Safety. And so this is going to mean that our opponent, if our opponent draws a land, they can get in with one creature here. So bring us down to 2 with, or it looks like our opponent's going to play a creature instead. So that's going to mean that we're not going to be able to be attacked here. We've got 3 enchantments, so our opponent would have to pay 6. So it looks like, understandably, our opponent's not aware of how Sphere of Safety really works in this type of spot, which it's nice to be playing a deck where the opponent just doesn't know what's going on. And now we can start to get even further ahead with a ley line and then a Porphyr Nodes. So that's going to add even more enchantments, so that now these Sphere of Safeties are going to be super difficult to get through. So hard to see exactly how our opponent is going to win this one. And just going to use the flagstones to thin the deck a little bit, the nodes can start essentially machine gunning away these creatures. Now that may mean we end up losing the face fetters a little bit later, and it does look like our opponent has plenty of lands, but not enough. So this attack would require paying 10, and our opponent is unable to do that. So yeah, this game's going to be going on for a few more turns, that's for sure. It's hard to see. We're playing against a mono green deck that plans to get in on the ground. So we're just hoping to draw. If we draw an Enduring Ideal, that would be great. So we can either get rid of the Stranglegeist or the Dry Militant. I'm gonna go for the Militant. And a second node, so we can play the second Porphyr nodes. Or we don't even have to. We can just sit on it. That's also an option. I think the first one is doing good enough work that we don't need to play this one right now, so I'm just going to pass. And it looks like our opponent is still trying to make these attacks that aren't going to work. So now we have to target the Geist. It's going to come back in with a counter, but there's a Heliod. So nice draw there. We can play Heliod. And now with Nykthos we can activate Nykthos and start really going to work with this Heliod, God of the Sun. So go ahead and make 7 mana. So we're going to get 1 activation, it looks like. That's fine. Although it does look like we're going to have to get rid of this Cleric. Wasn't thinking about that. Sorry about that. So we have to get rid of the Cleric we make with the nodes. That is a little bit unfortunate. Fraction Unlife, though, is a good draw. And because we have this Heliod, these nodes are basically not going to go away. Because we target the Heliod. Although it's not a targeted ability, so eventually the Heliod could maybe die if we play the second nodes. Don't think we need to play the second nodes, but I am going to attack with Heliod. And that makes sense, so our opponent's just going to make a chump block. We can play the Fraction Unlife. That's going to give us even more insurance. It's essentially a gain 10 life, assuming that our opponent doesn't have any infect creatures. And the face fetters is going to go away. That's going to mean, or we can first get rid of the experiment one. Sure, let's do that. But eventually this face fetters is going to go away. But I like the decision not to commit the second nodes to play, because we can just win with the Heliod. We can make Clerics once we get rid of our opponent's creatures. We could make Clerics right now. But I'm not going to. And here's an Oblivion Ring. We can use that if we want to, but it's not really necessary. So it looks like our opponent's holding out for something, but hard to picture what that could possibly be. And still not able to attack with the Avatar. We have 6 enchantments in play, So that would require 12 mana. And it looks like Experiment 1s are starting to enter play just as chump blockers. So our opponent was sandbagging some creatures. And so Porphyr Nodes is can be creatures tied with the greatest power. I don't think we need to do anything here. We can just start getting rid of the Experiment 1s. There's a Ghostly Prison. I like continuing the attacks with Heliod. And I'm not making any Clerics because they could potentially die to our own Porphyr Nodes. And that's why I've chosen not to go in that direction. So just going to play a copy of Ghostly Prison. And that's going to warrant a concession here. Double Sphere plus Ghostly Prison. So makes sense. Our opponent was unable to do anything in that game, even though we had not drawn the signature card of the deck, which is Enduring Ideal. So looking at the sideboard, there's definitely some swaps we want to make. Leyline of Sanctity, it's just there as an enchantment. We haven't seen any reason why giving ourselves hexproof would be good in this matchup. So I'm going to board out the Leylines. Similarly, Suppression Field, we didn't see fetch lands, we didn't see activated abilities. So those are the cards that immediately come to mind. We just don't want them in the matchup. We want additional removal, Path to Exile, Journey to Nowhere, and Oblivion Ring. Those are cards we definitely would like. And then it's a little bit tricky because we don't have any more cards that we clearly want. Our opponent could be boarding in enchantment removal, so going to a card like Greater Aromancy makes some sense. And I also don't mind the copies of Peace of Mind. We might find ourselves in a bind and needing to gain life. And it seems better than the other options. So I think this is what I want to submit. So let's go with it. And we are going to be on the draw this game, so this hand is definitely pretty vulnerable. Form of the Dragon is more or less a brick, so the 6-card hand, Greater Aromancy, is not the best in the matchup. Ghostly Prison, Enduring Ideal, and 3 lands, though. That stuff is all good. So I think this is a borderline hand. I'm going to keep it. And the Greater Aromancy could very easily not do anything. But I like the idea of Ghostly Prison. I think that's one of the best cards in the matchup. We also get a Scry. We can look for early removal with the Scry. Of course, we didn't see any. But Greater Aromancy, at its worst, we can play it. It's an enchantment to help with Nykthos. And it looks like our opponent has a pretty solid draw. 1-drop into 2-drop. So, yep, not really too much of a decision here. I'm going to play out the Greater Aromancy. And if our opponent boarded in something like Nature's Claim, etc., then this card is going to be important. We can play the Ghostly Prison. Now, we're hoping that our opponent doesn't have a lot of lands. But here's a Groundbreaker, so this is pretty absurd. Our opponent's going to be able to attack us for 11. So, not what we wanted to see at all. Journey to Nowhere off the top. I think we might actually want to play this Journey, get rid of the Tusker. So I'm going to do that rather than the Ghostly Prison. But no question, this is not the ideal situation. If our opponent has another groundbreaker, we would just be dead here. And it looks like it's going to be Strangleroot, guys, so... Or even, wow, Vines of Vastwood, that's going to be 8. So it looks like we are going to be going to a game 3. And like I was saying earlier, there's just some cards that are not ideal in this matchup. The Greater Auramancy, we didn't see any targeted removal. At the same time, we've got a lot of cards we don't necessarily really want in the matchup. As far as artifacts and enchantments, don't believe we saw any. Boseiju, Stony Silence, Rest in Peace, Suppression Field. Nevermore is a card that could be okay. It also helps with our devotion. So let's try that in exchange for that Greater Auramancy. But we are going to be on the play, so that is one nice thing about this game. I'm going to keep Path, Ghostly Prison, and Enduring Ideal, plus 4 lands, so fine hand. And we'll see what our opponent can come up with. That last draw by our opponent, sure, this is a mono green deck that's not a typical modern deck, but just curving out is going to be good with solid creatures with power and toughness plus pump spells, and that mix is going to be powerful against a deck like this, no matter what type of deck you're playing against. So it's similar to if we were playing against a mono red deck with a bunch of small creatures. It happens to be mono green with basically a lot of creatures. The only non-creature spell I believe we've seen is Vines of Vastwood. So if we're able to stymie the bleeding early, that's going to be extremely important. And there's the Nevermore that we actually sideboarded into, so it's going to be a question of if there's going to be something good to name, and taking the opportunity to do that. So here's a Rancor. I think that we want to respond to this Rancor with Path to Exile. If our opponent does have Vines, that's going to be good for our opponent. And it looks like Vines is going to get cast here, so the Rancor is going to resolve. And gonna get hit for 4 damage. So you can take the opportunity to play the Ghostly Prison. Our opponent can still attack us. We're looking for another copy of Ghostly Prison. Would be great. Here's another Dryad Militant. Okay. So we do want more removal. That is clear. Sphere of Safety, that's actually a pretty good draw. We can play that next turn. So I'm going to run out Nevermore. And I think we want to just name Vines of Vastwood. Hard to name against this deck, but we saw one Vines. I'm pretty sure based on how these games have played that our opponent's likely to have a full play set, 3 or 4 Vines of Vastwoods. So we can play the Sphere next turn and then create a much more difficult lock on the game in terms of our opponent can attack us for 6 this turn, which is definitely annoying. Being that it's a 1-turn, it's basically our opponent can put us on a 2-turn clock. But if we play the Sphere of Safety with 3 enchantments in play, it's going to mean that our opponent's going to have to pay 5 to attack with 1 creature. We still are in a spot where we're going to want to draw more enchantments, or have our opponent not have a lot of lands, but our opponent has not missed any land drops. But here's a Ruined Halo. That's actually a great draw. Our opponent's got 2 Dryad Militants in play. So we have the option of changing course and just playing the Ruined Halo out. But I think we may want to play the Sphere first. I like doing this, and I'll explain why. We've seen Groundbreaker, so our opponent could just go Groundbreaker, land, attack us for 6 if we don't have the Sphere in play. So now our opponent can only attack us for 4. This is going to mean we go all the way down to 2. But next turn we can play the Ruined Halo and name Dryad Militant. And so hopefully that will stop our opponent doing too much damage to us. So we could also name something else now that we've drawn this Journey to Nowhere. But I think we still just name the Dryad Militant. So now that Dryad Militant is named, we have 4 enchantments in play. Our opponent could still play a haste creature like a Strangleroot Geist, but then wouldn't have the mana to pay to attack. So I don't think we need to play this Journey to Nowhere, and I like passing the turn. And so here is the Strangleroot Geist. Okay, so and a Dryad Militant. That third Dryad Militant doesn't really matter. We can Journey to Nowhere away the Strangleroot Geist sitting in play. And actually, that's a perfect draw. We drew Nykthos. So I believe we're going to be able to Enduring Ideal and close out this game with Enduring Ideal. So we can play the Journey to Nowhere first. Might as well. So I'm going to get rid of the Strangleroot Geist. And then go for Enduring Ideal. And I don't see a great reason not to just go for Form of the Dragon. So I'm going to do that. And this should spell the end of the game. I don't know what our opponent could possibly do to get out of this lock that we have. So we're going to clock our opponent for 5 here with the Form of the Dragon. And it looks like before this Enduring Ideal is going to resolve, our opponent is just going to concede here. So that's going to do it. Our opponent didn't really have outs.